Yesterday was Pi Day, by the way.
What?
Pi Day.
Our regularly scheduled council meeting of March 15th is now in session. Would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Clark.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman.
Here.
Councilmember Cernanik.
Present.
Councilmember Cole.
Here.
Councilmember Stallman.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember Trujillo.
Here.
Would you all rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any changes to the agenda? Then it's approved as submitted. Minutes of the council workshop, February 18th. And I actually have a suggested change from lines 126 through 151, which I typed up here to give to Wendy, but basically what it would do is, there's a couple of these topics that are really the same topics that are listed as slightly differently, and then there's one or two of these items that we actually asked for information back from the city manager in a memo form rather than a study session topic, so it would just clean that up. Any other changes?
The changes then that came in the draft of the workshop report, just make sure they are coordinated.
Yes.
The same.
Yes, and and then we have to get our changes for the workshop report by, is it next Friday?
This Friday?
This Friday. Slave driver.
Boy, the pressure's on.
Yes.
Don't try to weasel out of it, Mayor.
Is it possible to possibly email what the mayor has as changes in that section this week, so as we're reviewing the council workshop, we can have that information?
Sure. Do you want to postpone approving these until you see the changes in the workshop and do it at the same time?
No.
Okay.
You can email that by tomorrow noon?
All the pressure, yes. Whether Wendy could do that by tomorrow noon, I see her.
I have jury duty tomorrow.
Okay, so you'll have a,
But you can email it.
I can email you. In fact,
Take
if
your
we get
laptop.
copies, we could pass this out tonight. Okay. All right. Those minutes are approved
No,
with
you
the
didn't
changes.
ask if there are more after all that talking.
I'm sorry. Are there more?
Yes, on
Okay.
page 3. Just so we have some similar information about a couple people and a couple other changes. Line 72, add comma, owner and developer. So it'd be Jonathan Bush, Littleton Capital Partners, owner and developer. 74, same kind of addition, owners, Regency Centers, owners of Littleton Square. Line 80, she would like to teach a community marketing class this summer, so add the words this summer. And then substitute for lines 99 and 100, Chris Gibbons gave a PowerPoint presentation of the economic gardening program and answered questions regarding the effectiveness and efficiency of the economic gardening program compared to other economic development efforts. And Wendy, I can give you a typed version of that.
Okay. Anything else? And those minutes are approved as changed March 1st. Changes.
I have a couple.
Okay.
Oh, Jim, do you have some?
Go ahead.
Get my stack straight here. On page 1, line 18, I would like to revise to read, recognizing the 45th anniversary of Jose's Restaurant and all that each of them has contributed to Littleton. That's one change. Line 23, I would like to revise to read, the agenda for March 1, 2011 was approved as amended. For those who don't have a copy of this, it says the mayor approved, but the mayor doesn't get to do that all by himself, so,
He tries at times.
yeah, sometimes, yeah. On page 7, I believe, is the next one.
Okay.
Line 221, delete the word "and," so the sentence would read, "He indicated that he would follow up with a check to," et cetera, et cetera. And on page 9, line 309, Sean Dugan, it's S-H-E-A-N, I believe, rather than S-H-A-W-N. That's all. At least all of mine.
I do. Page 5, it's actually a question. In line 136, it says there were 11 applicants and 9 new appointments. I guess that is right, isn't it?
Well,
We had 10 applicants.
new ones.
Okay, we only made 9 out of the 10 appointments, though. Okay, that's all right. This is fine.
Okay.
It works.
All right. Anything else? Then that is approved as submitted. I'm sorry, approved with those few small minor changes. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Council, Val Fetters is not here tonight. She's actually working, but we did want to acknowledge, some of you probably know Val. She was with Bemis Library for 4.5 years, and then just took a break, about an 8-month break, and she has just rejoined us as our the supervisor of our children's division at the library. So she came by and she says, "I'm working tonight." I says, "That's all right. I'll just let them know you're here." So if you have a chance, she's a neat lady. They're really happy to have her back at Bemis. So if you have a chance to just drop by and say hi, but she's rejoined us. So wanted to let council know that.
Okay, thank you. Which brings us to unscheduled public appearances, a time for anybody can come down and address us on any issue. Bobby.
Good evening. My name is Bobby Sheffield. I live at 7215 Houston Waring Circle, Littleton 80120, and I'm here tonight as the president of South Metro Land Conservancy. I'm here because South Metro Land Conservancy would really like to serve on your open space task force. We were formed in 1993, and we are the local land trust in the area. We are very familiar with Littleton, with your values and with the values of people who live here. We are very vested in the community. We also serve as a member of the highly successful South Platte Working Group, the Cherry Creek Basin Working Group, and the Highline Canal Working Group. We hold 3 conservation easements, 2 of which are for the city of Littleton, Lee Gulch, and recently the Answer property. We really feel that South Metro Land Conservancy would be a valuable member to your open space task force. And I just thank you for considering our request. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Anyone else? All right, that brings us to our consent agenda. We have 2 items on the consent agenda. First one is an ordinance authorizing the sale of the Sternberg property.
This is an ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, authorizing the conveyance of property known as the Sternberg property to LCP 1900 LLC.
The Sternberg property is the building that's on Littleton Boulevard next to the courthouse on the north side. It is been there for a while. It's been vacant for a while. The city instructed the staff to explore different alternatives for getting the building sold. This is the result of those explorations. This would approve a contract for sale with the building. with a company that's in Littleton. Public hearing on that is April 5th. Next item.
I want to pull that one for clarification purposes.
Item 7B.
This is an ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, approving an access and parking easement between City of Littleton and LCP 1900 LLC.
One of the issues with this building is that it has, 7,000 square feet of potential office space inside, and the number of parking places that it has immediately around it are limited. And to add to the complexity of that, some of those parking places are, I don't know, dedicated, is that the right word, to the Buck Center through a PD plan. So this ordinance would establish an easement to get to the loading dock of the Buck Center through a portion of the parking lot, and establish responsibilities for snow removal and other various aspects of that. Plus, it would commit the city to create, I believe it's 5 new parking places out of what's currently the back lot of the road. This would be done in addition to changes that would have to be done to the PD plan of this, which would come back to the council at a future date. I don't think we have that date set.
No, sir, that's, the staff's still preparing that to put it in front of the planning commission.
Okay, and it'd have to go to the planning commission first and then to the city
Yes, sir.
council. And that, all of that would complete the sale of the property, or would complete all the transactions necessary related to the sale of the property. Public hearing for this is also April 5th.
I want to pull this one too.
Okay, they're both pulled. Let's go to item 7A.
So I have question for clarification about Exhibit A. We have now in front of us a new 7A, and I'm trying to understand which of these 7As that's in this stapled document that is. I'm assuming it's the first Exhibit A following the ordinance?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That starts out the east 120 feet of lots
Right.
25, 26.
And so my question is, how does that square with the Exhibit A that's attached to the contract?
They're now the same.
Pardon?
They are now the same.
No, not in my packet. The one that you gave us is the same as the one in the packet, but it's different from the one at the back of the packet. The one says the east part, east 120 feet of, and the one at the back of the attachment says all of lots.
Right, we're trying to substitute the one we gave you for the one at the back of the attachment.
Okay, so it's the back one, not the, okay.
Right.
That's what I was trying to,
And then they would both be as Exhibit A, legal description attached to the ordinance.
okay, so,
And there was some minor change, I don't remember the nuance of it, but there was a minor change to the legal description from the time that we initially approved the contract to the time that we did the survey, and so the legals ended up being different, so we're going to go back through and approve this contract again.
okay.
Another change to the contract was the name of the partnership. It was initially something else, and they've incorporated separately for this transaction.
Okay. So now that we have that square, maybe I'll move make
Please.
the motion. I move that an ordinance approving the sale of property located at 2009 to 2049 West Littleton Boulevard to LCP 1900 LCP be approved on first reading, that it be posted on the city's website at the Littleton City Center, Bemis Library, and the municipal courthouse, and that the council president be authorized to affix his signature thereto, and that a public hearing be set for
April 5th.
April 5, 2011.
Second.
Okay, that was Bruce. Seconded?
Yeah.
All right, any discussion? Council ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor, the motion's approved.
All right, 7B.
Okay, now, let me make sure which part I'm seeing here that I was asking about. Okay, I think I have two questions here. First, on the first sheet that follows the ordinance with the recitals, the second whereas says, whereas LCP 1900 LLC is the owner of approximately .29 acres, et cetera. But they aren't the owners yet. They won't be, right, until after the other ordinance is read and executed on second reading, and money changes hands, right? More money.
Right, and Section 1 of the ordinance indicates that the easement attached here too is approved and will be executed upon sale. So the agreement that you would be approving would not be executed until the actual sale occurred.
Yeah, but the whereas does not seem to be true. Whereas they've entered into an agreement, for the sale, but they aren't the owners.
Right, but an easement is always going to be between the two parties, and so it would be very difficult to write the easement in the future. It's just that the easement won't be executed until after the sale. So if the sale doesn't occur, this document will never be executed.
I'm still not, I understand that piece of it. I don't understand the whereas piece. Jim, you want to?
Can I try?
Sure.
Peggy, I think you have to look at this in a sequential manner, that the ordinance that we just approved would be adopted first, and then this is going to be adopted second. It would be sequential, so therefore, the wording here, I think, is correct in that we've already transferred that by ownership, and even though they may occur the same night or not the same night, this one is going to be subservient to the first.
So we're still playing with it a little bit, because we're approving it tonight on first reading with that wording. I would have no objection to that wording on the second reading.
Let me try.
Thank you, I'm sorry, I need all this help here.
Okay. If you go to the first page of the ordinance, Peggy. Okay, if you go down to Section 1, Section 1 indicates that the easement will be executed upon the sale of the property, so it's stating it in the future tense. Okay, so the easement statement that you're reading with the whereas doesn't even happen until the ordinance is first approved, and that won't happen until after second reading.
Yeah, I guess I would not have been a good lawyer, although I think I would have. The therefore clause does not say now therefore be the easement officially executed. It says now the council's doing such and such. But if this is just a legal technicality and no big people are going to stand up and challenge it legally, then I won't oppose that. But I do have a second question then. That's about Exhibit A, which has the same, I think, same description as the one that we just replaced in 7A.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll need to
Well-
substitute, does it?
About this. The easement,
The easement is, I thought, smaller than
the lots,
I thought
Oh,
the
I think
easement
the
was...
easement, I think that's right for the easement, because we're giving them an easement across all of our property. And where the other one we were conveying, we moved it because we wanted to actually enlarge the parking spaces at the courthouse. So I think the legal description of the easement is correct, because we're going to cross-share, provide them an easement across our property.
Okay, let me,
I think that's right, Dr.
so
Cole.
walk me through that piece just briefly then. So where that's
And
referred to,
I'm sorry, I don't have, the person who really knows this is Fred Bromberger, the engineer. Charlie, do you have that map, Charlie Bloston?
No, I don't.
Okay.
it just didn't, maybe, I won't hold this up tonight, but if you could look
Yeah,
at that.
we can
'cause it-
clarify that. I think I'll double check, we can correct that, but I think because we're providing them an easement across the entire parcel, the entire Sternberg parcel, whereas the property was modified just a little bit, so that's why you had that 120 feet east on the actual conveyance.
Okay, well,
But we
when I-
can double check with Mr. Bromberger.
I think part of what I was looking at is the way the easement, Exhibit E and F are worded. So just as long as you guys are comfortable with that, after the mistake in the
Yeah,
first
we'll
one,
double check
then I
that. Thank
thought
you
there
for
might
bringing that to
be,
my attention, and if that's an error, we can give you an amendment
okay,
on April 5.
yeah. It just, after I got persuaded that, I persuaded myself and then you all that 7A needed a correction, then
Yeah,
I was overlaying that on this one, so,
we should double check that. Thank you for pointing that out.
okay. Well, now that I've caused such furor on two of them, I'll read the motion on this one too then. I move that an ordinance approving the access and parking easement agreement with LCP, 1900 LCP, be approved on first reading, that it be posted on the city's website, at the Littleton City Center, Bemis Library, and the municipal courthouse, and that the council president be authorized to affix his signature thereto, and that a public hearing be set for April 5, 2011.
Second.
Thank you, Bruce. Been moved and seconded to approve the ordinance in the first reading for the easements. Discussion? Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor, the motion's approved.
Okay. That brings us to 8A, which is a discussion of the Open Space Task Force.
9A, you said 8A.
9A.
I'm sorry, 9A.
We have no 8s tonight.
9A. Week ago, when the council was discussing open space, they decided that they wanted to create an open space task force, but we were struggling with the charge that should be given to the task force, and potentially, we had designated membership of the task force. What we have is a communication from the staff where we ask them to propose a charge to the task force based on what previous task force and currently existing different task force have, because we have a South Platte working group, a Highline Canal working group, and we had a previous South Platte group that went through and designated areas for buffering the South Platte Park in 96, was it, Phil?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Not that I'm a historian.
one of the things I'd like to say as we start the discussion of this is, in the communication, is a figure that I've heard for years, that there's an accepted standard of 10.5 acres per open space, 10.5 acres of open space per 1,000 population, and apparently that comes from the National Recreation and Parks Association. I believe that's the ratio that we use for land dedication on zoning, that we require land dedication based on that ratio. However, if we compare what actually is in Colorado, I think what we find is that we have a higher ratio. I believe it says elsewhere in here that we are up to is it 35 acres per 1,000 residents?
Yes, sir, we're 3.5 times the national
The
average.
national average.
I might point out to you, just for council's information too, that figure is actually still contained in our comp plan.
Okay.
So that if you go and look at the comp plan in the Parks and Recreation open space, it references that 10.5 acres per 1,000.
Yeah,
So that is actually still contained in the city's comp plan.
And that's been, I've heard that figure for years now.
Yes, sir.
But out of curiosity, I went out and looked at how many acres of parkland Denver has. And they have a map that is similar to what we have on the back page of the communication. And so I went through and added up all the little parks, because they list each park by address. And Denver has 3,600 acres of parks in the urban area, and they have 14,000 acres of mountain parks. If you add that all together, Denver has a ratio of about 31 acres per 1,000 residents, which means that we're actually fairly close to the ratio that Denver has.
But Doug, on those mountain parks, those are not within the city limits.
They are not within the city limits. However, they are.
And that's what this standard is a standard refers to within city limits. I understand what you're doing in accumulating that, but it's not a good comparison.
Well, you're free to make the comparison any way you want to. It's interesting to note that we have almost the exact ratio of rec centers to population that Denver does. And interestingly enough, we also have almost the exact same ratio of pools to population that Denver does, which surprised me. But as Phil pointed out, Denver has a large percentage of acreage that's outside of the city limits in the mountains. We have a large percentage of acres that's clustered around South Platte Park. So each city's going to have a unique combination of parks and needs, but the point that I was getting to is that the citizens' desires and the configuration of land in cities in Colorado are going to be different than they are in other areas of the country. And we have a substantially more acreage per residence than you do across the national average, but I suspect that we're closer to what the Colorado average is in Colorado cities, but once again, that's going to depend on which city you're looking at and how old the city is and how big the city is also. Council, we had Bobby come down, Bobby Sheffield from South Metro Land Conservancy. They requested a position on the Open Space Task Force.
Personally, I think South Metro Land Conservancy would be a great addition to the task force for many of the reasons that Bobby illustrated. They do have a depth of experience and a depth of work over a number of years, extending beyond our boundaries. And the fact that we have them as a conservatorship over a couple of our recent purchases in Littleton, I think that they would bring a solid voice to the committee. And having sat with Bobby on the South Platte Working Group, they bring a perspective that I think would be welcome on this committee too.
And Jim, I know you had some concerns about potential membership too.
I do have concerns about the membership. The proposed membership being Arapahoe County, South Suburban Parks and Recreation District, the Trust for Public Land, Littleton City Staff, South Metro Land Conservancy, and City Council. What's missing out of that is a voice from the other side. All of these people that are listed are all people who support parks, open space, and not looking at what the potential is for development of a piece of property. And I would like to see at least one member appointed to this task force who's going to give a voice that would support the commercial development, if that's, or residential development of a piece of property that may be under consideration by this group. And I have no suggestion unless you just go to some broker like Grubb and Ellis or somebody like that. I don't know who's prominent in the area, and get somebody from there to be on the task force. You can't ask them to live in the city because we've got Trust for Public Land and they don't live in the city.
Jim, a question on that. There's a notation here that the task force membership could be expanded if it's determined that additional technical knowledge or expertise is desirable to adequately evaluate a particular parcel. So that would kind of, to me, leave that door open for, because we had discussed in our study session possibly a realtor, developer, when we're evaluating specific things, that their expertise may be welcome. Is that adequate for you, or would you like to see them as a?
It really is not adequate,
Okay.
simply because if the group, as a group says, or majority of the group says, oh, I don't think we need that, then that's out the window. You haven't heard that other voice out there. And so I don't think that's to do it.
Do you want to suggest a name, or are you comfortable with just designating the position?
I just designated commission. I don't know, I don't have a name.
Okay.
Well, could I comment on that first?
Yes.
We have 6 criteria that are to be considered, two of which relate, one negatively, one positively, in terms of impact on long-term financial viability of the city, items 3 and 4. And I would assume that somebody on council, we have to decide who on council is going to represent, and that the whole group is going to be looking at all 6 of these. They're not going to be deciding which properties council and related groups might want to go into joint purchase on, but there would be opportunity for the various people to speak about the impact on the commercial needs of the city for more development. So I don't want it all not to have adequate voice and opportunity for voices to speak to that. But it seems to me that at least a couple people on council have very strong views on that, the economic commercial development. And city staff, I would assume, just as Jim has pointed out several times, including at the workshop as we went through the whole list of properties that Charlie was pointing out, going over, whether or not something might be a really good piece for commercial development or not. I'm assuming that voice is going to be heard, but I don't object if we want to leave it open for appointing some expertise as needed on particular parcels.
Jim, you want to make a motion?
I think we ought to do this one at a time, perhaps, instead of all together. Like you
No,
make a motion.
I was going to suggest one at a time,
Okay.
to add to membership. Sorry, would you like to do a motion to add somebody on the membership?
Okay. I would move that someone from the developer or commercial broker be added to this list. And I guess I'm going to ask if staff can come up with some names to do that.
Hang on. Commercial developer,
Commercial broker or developer.
or developer.
Is that possible, Jim, for you guys to come up with
Yes,
some
I think
names?
we could talk to some of the brokers that have, particularly that we know have been active in Littleton, that are familiar with Littleton, that maybe have represented some landowners in Littleton, particularly I think up and down the valley. See if one of them would be interested in serving, and then we could bring a couple of names back to you and suggest them to you once we've found out if they're interested in serving.
That'd be fine with me.
Okay, so the motion is to add a commercial broker or developer to the task force membership.
Second.
Discussion.
I have a concern on this. I think that, while I don't think it's a bad idea to have their input, in fact, I think input great while around. I have a bit of a concern in that, particularly what Jim just said. I mean, these guys have, and you could argue, I suppose, that Trust for Public Land has a financial interest in this also, but they have a, as a broker, as a commercial developer, they definitely have a financial interest in this. If we're using someone who's in Littleton, who has worked with landowners, who's looked at some of this property, it would be hard to find someone who hasn't in Littleton. I get a little bit concerned about that. Well, I think there's definitely a other side of the coin from, to allow, other opinions. I think that that's great. I'm just not, I guess I'm a little bit hesitant to put someone on the task force when we do have an opportunity based on what we're looking at particular parcels to expand membership, to work on specific issues. And as Peggy said, we've got plenty of places along the way where there will be input and opportunity. And by following the criteria, those are all things we would need to evaluate. So I guess I just have some hesitancy based on whether or not we can get the, a fairness issue on that.
Bruce, and then Jim.
I was, to this point, I was sort of looking at the criteria, and I think maybe the context, I guess what I was going to throw out was maybe a seventh criteria, or combining potentially 4 and 5 into something along the lines of an assessment by parcel priority of the likelihood or the probability of commercial or development viability. So, for example, specifically the Abear property, for the sake of a discussion point, as part of the assessment of that for purposes of open space commitment or designation, somebody going back and looking at it from the standpoint of realistically what is a high, low, medium kind of probability of this thing ever being developed, and what other criteria or what other attributes need to occur for it to be a viable development. Because I think then it becomes a valuable piece of information. I mean, it's one thing for somebody to come in and say from the commercial side, we'd like to develop the particular property, and so it becomes a push and pull versus open space relative to commercial. But if there's not a reasonably compelling argument that it's got a reasonable chance of ever really being commercially developed, then I think it sort of starts weighing the scales more towards the open space side. So it'd be really interesting to have that attribute as one of these criteria.
Let me just add a couple of comments for you and to respond both to the issues raised by Councilman Taylor and the concerns raised by Councilwoman Brinkman. The initial idea would be that this was, the initial membership were all volunteers. I mean, although some of them may be paid staff people, but and that was the 96 task force where we had a realtor that served on that. The idea of the sort of the footnote, Debbie, that you mentioned of technical expertise, if the task force wanted, you could have the alternative to bring in outside consultants for, I understand the point Debbie's making about if you have a realtor that's in town, they may have a conflict of interest if they're associated with a particular landowner. So that would be a hybrid possible solution to try to get to what you're saying, Bruce. In that instance, you're probably looking at retaining somebody on a professional basis and maybe looking for some budget authorization. So I just didn't know quite where the council's comfort level was, how far you wanted to go in that direction. That's why I kind of put that catch-all phrase in there about the technical expertise, to just, if you got to a point where you said, we'd like to have maybe somebody come in, just a third party, kind of an objective professional person to take a look at it and give you an assessment.
Can I ask a question then in response to that? The city, usually in conjunction with other folks, has purchased quite a bit of park and open space. But it did it because somebody got the idea that they might like to do this, and we didn't, and former councils didn't, and I think staff didn't go and ask somebody on the commercial side, how viable is this? You guys have your thumb on the pulse beat pretty darn well, I think. So I'm not understanding, if we wound up acquiring all that we did already through the process that we've been using all these years, why suddenly now a group that's merely going to prioritize and do things, and then council will then be in the position that it was in purchasing all these others, to look rigorously at things that might or might not have gotten considered. So I'm not seeing where the problem is here. It seems to me, this is just a group saying, geez, these would be nice and we'd see them nice in this order, but where it goes from there sort of then feeds into the process that's been used all along.
Jim?
Well, I want to both answer Peggy and Debbie, and I'll start with Peggy. The city has bought a lot of property, you're correct, in the past, and we paid the price for that because the price was based upon an appraisal, and the appraisal was done for the best and most productive use in lots of cases for that piece of property. So if it was based on an assessment for residential was one price, is based on an assessment for commercial was another, and that had to do with the zoning that the property had in the first place. So I think that we have in the past taken that into account as far as what we paid for the property and how it was how it happened to become open space or parkland. And I guess that when Debbie's talking about somebody having a financial interest in a piece of property, potentially that would become open space, if Debbie becomes one of the members that's appointed by City Council, I think she's got a financial interest as well in that one of the pieces under discussion is across the fence from her home. And if that becomes open space, it is going to increase the value of her house, and therefore she's going to have a financial interest in that as well. It may not happen tomorrow, it may happen 20, 30 years from now, but living next door to open space is probably going to increase the value of a piece of property.
Bruce, and then Deb.
Couple of, Jim, I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I don't get the impression that any of this conversation I think this is being held from the perspective of the best interest of the community at large. I don't get any takeaway that there's personal issues involved with this beyond just a passion for open space. So I need to say that. I'm not sure. I pretty much would not agree with your last comment there. But and Peggy, I think the other point I wanted to bring up with you is that or to your comment was, I think the answer to your question is sort of the way you phrase the question. The fact of the matter is that we've spent a lot of money to get to this point, but the available resources now are becoming much more scarce. And I think the key is there's a variety of ways to prioritize, and one of the key prioritization dimensions, given the limited amount of developable open space or property we've got, has a commercial attribute associated with it. And so from my perspective, I'm absolutely interested in what's the group's view towards the highest value-added open space piece of property for purposes of supplementing what we've got, because we've got money that we should spend based on what the taxpayers have given us to spend and said, go do this. But by the same token, maybe the top priority falls to second or third if there's an attribute of development that we really should consider from a fiduciary responsibility in terms of rank ordering the various parcels that are left to be purchased. That's where I was coming from with the issue of some sort of probability or risk assessment of would a particular parcel ever be likely to be developed, and if so, under what set of circumstances or time horizon.
It's just that I think that I hear this from the staff, who, as I say, really seem to have their finger on the pulse related to this. And with certain considerations that we've had over properties that we've purchased even while I've been on council, that kind of information has been shared with us. Well, at least while I have, maybe during that little piece that you weren't on council with me. But I mean, we heard this, I think, even as I said at the workshop, that this is a given piece is probably a really good potential for commercial development, et cetera. Even when we just approved the last piece that we just approved, that you said, boy, that's a lot of money for 0.3 acres or whatever.
Right.
That was in an area that potentially could be bought up by somebody combined with something else and whatever. But we weighed that, I think, very carefully. I think councils generally do a good job of weighing these things, and that staff helps them with that piece. So I see this list of things guiding the task force, but the real burden comes, I think, then when it gets something gets recommended for purchase. But I wouldn't object if you wanted to add item 7 to this list that somehow. I tried to figure out one to add myself, and it kept tripping on itself.
Okay. Yep.
Well, I'm sitting there trying to decide what I want to say in response to Jim's comment. Jim, I'm sorry you went there with that one. I think I've spent a substantial amount of time on council working towards what I feel is the greater good for Littleton. That's where my heart is, regardless of where my home is. There are 38 properties listed on here, and I suspect the task force will probably uncover another 15 or 20 more. I think the entire city of Littleton can benefit from a good view, a good review, a good analysis of whether or not property sitting vacant next to them has a better and greater use. I'll let my record speak for itself. I'll let my voting speak for itself. I'll let my words speak for themselves.
Phil.
Just to weigh in a bit. Actually, I see this task force as allowing us to put together more of a strategic framework in thinking through potential property acquisition. It's meant not to necessarily or take us away from examining each property as it might come on the market or become available, but actually be in a position to think about it in terms of that greater good for Littleton, balancing off both what is there for adding to the value of our ambiance with open space and park, but also a consideration that needs to be made towards economic development possibilities in the city. And it takes us away from, and Peggy, probably my comments are more directed on yours, which is it takes us away from that as it comes up, but to be in a position that we can be taking a look more at the overall land use and strategic perspective that it has us looking out farther over the horizon.
Council, I'm going to recommend that in a few minutes, I'm going to recommend that one of the tasks we give to the task force is to come up with a list of criteria that they bring back to the council for approval. And one of the other tasks that we give to the task force is to define the different immediate tasks that they have. I have some viewpoints on what I think that is. But now to Jim's specific motion, and the motion was to add a commercial realtor or developer to the membership of the task force. The reason why we're here where we are tonight with the task force is because there is a tension between the desires of the citizens, which is reflected in the fact that they voted themselves an open space tax, and what they've expressed repeatedly over and over in Littleton, with the fact that we have a limited amount of vacant property left, and on the top of my head calculation is we have about 40-some acres in Marathon that's residential and about 11 acres left in Enzer that's residential, and all the rest of the vacant property that I can think of is zoned commercial. So potentially every piece of property, or probably the majorities of the piece of property that's going to come out of this list, is going to be vacant commercial property that is going to have a tension between, is that the right purchase to satisfy the needs of what the citizens view, how they want their city to be, versus the economics of providing tax revenue and commercial base. And I actually think that it would be a good idea to have a developer, and I'm more concerned, I'm more leaning, I think it would be more appropriate to have a commercial developer rather than a commercial broker, because the developer is the one that's going to know what the risk factors are, what it takes to develop property and things like this. I mean, this task force is faced with facts that everybody has to face up to, and that is that we have some $3 million in our open space fund. The county has millions more in the open space fund. The citizens have clearly said that they want that to be spent and want us to procure open space and parks, while at the same time we recognize that we have some commercial realities. So I think that having a developer there as part of the discussion would actually help go through the process, and it would help the recommendations be better, and it would help the recommendations be accepted by the community better. So I'm going to support the motion to add a commercial broker or developer to the membership, hoping it's a developer. Any other discussion on the motion?
Do you want to amend it to say developer?
No, I'm
Ambivalent?
Well, with what Jim said, they'll come up with some names for us.
Okay.
Yeah, and
That's fair.
I think it'll come back to council. They'll come up with a list of some names, come back to council, and we can pick.
Okay.
Okay, the motion is to add a commercial broker or developer to the membership of the task force.
The vote is 5 in favor with Councilwoman Cole and Councilwoman Brinkman voting no. The motion's approved.
Okay, Debbie.
Make a motion to include South Metro Land Conservancy on task force membership.
Second.
Okay. It's a motion to include South Metro Land Conservancy on the membership. Discussion.
Probably more of a question on the overall membership. In someone from Arapahoe County, what's envisioned there?
Let's deal this one at a time, Phil.
Well, that would influence me.
I think the reason why Arapahoe County, and I'm assuming the reason why this got on there from our study session is Arapahoe County brings money with them. And part of this process is what are the funding mechanisms for these pieces of property? But the money that Arapahoe County brings also has restrictions on it. So as you start to go through the list of potential property, you actually have a tension between South Suburban and Arapahoe County because South Suburban is in the park business, and part of that park business is active recreation, and yet active recreation is excluded from some of the monies that Arapahoe County Open Space can purchase. So I think that was the reasoning behind having both of those on there.
Okay.
Any other discussion on adding South Metro Land Conservancy to the list?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion's approved.
Okay.
And I have a
Counsel.
question. Whoops.
I just have a quick point of clarification. There's actually 9 points on evaluation criteria. They were just numbered incorrectly. Counsel?
Oops, there you are.
Well, they start over.
Yeah,
Darn those word processors.
when there had been references to the numbers, I was confused, but
A3B.
do you want to add another 7?
I
to
must have
Bruce?
been interrupted by a phone call from Councilwoman Brinkman.
I had a question.
Yes.
I did say I have a question. The Littleton city staff, who would normally serve in such capacity?
Well, Charlie Bloston has been really kind of our key point person. And so I've talked with Charlie. I think he's very involved with the South Metro,
So usually
Southwest.
just
I'm sorry?
just him and not you also?
I didn't anticipate that. I mean, as you said, the entire staff would look at any evaluation, but in terms of just sitting as a representative of
Okay.
the staff.
I just want to make sure.
Yes, ma'am. Where our anticipation is it would be Charlie, since he's already involved with the South Platte Working Group and the Highline Canal.
Thank you.
Bruce?
Was going to ask, per your suggestion of the task force coming back with criteria, do we want a motion to add a potential criteria for consideration, or you just want to have part of the conversation?
I was going to make a motion, if nobody beat me to it, that we task the task force with coming back with a list of criteria for council's approval.
And I agree with that. I was just going to add one that was maybe more of a development probability or development risk.
Okay, then why don't you make the motion and add that as part of your motion?
Okay. All right. I'll move that we ask the task force to come back with a list of criteria that could include, but is not limited to, the list here of evaluation criteria for open space acquisition that would also involve, or would also consider, the potential likelihood of commercial or development viability at some point in the future.
All right, let me see if I could simplify that.
I can make it more complicated if you'd like. I mean, yeah, go for it.
Okay. The motion is that the task force bring back evaluation criteria to the council for approval.
Correct.
And that criteria use the listed criteria as a basis, adding the commercial development potential.
That's exactly what I was trying to communicate
Okay.
in an elongated fashion.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay.
It's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Discussion on the motion.
Well, I have one question. I know we call this open space task force. In some spaces, open space versus developed park might have different meanings. I'm looking at open space as an umbrella, and just want to get that as a clarification of understanding.
I agree with you, but perhaps we want to clarify that after we do this.
Would you read the motion again, if the short version of it?
Wendy, can you do that? Okay.
Look at the commercial viability, add that as a
Okay, that
criteria.
the task force bring
criteria.
back evaluation criteria to the council for approval, and that they use the listed criteria in the communication as a starting point, adding commercial viability.
This is why I don't make a lot
Okay,
of
so
motions.
just for clarification then, the way you stated it didn't sound the way Bruce stated it.
No, it didn't.
So.
I agree
what-
with, I agree
So what
with,
we want
yeah.
is to include these, and then they would recommend some additional ones?
No, they would, what the intent is that we would task them for coming back to us with a set of criteria, and we are giving them these 9 plus the additional 10 as a starting point. They may choose to remove some of these, they may choose to add some more to them, but they're going to have to come back to council for an approval of the criteria.
Okay, and so are you ready for discussion then?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to oppose this because I think all the ones that we have before us are essential. And if they see some others, I would welcome those, but I don't want them excluding any of these, even if, well, whatever, I just don't want them excluding any.
Okay, further discussion. I tell you, my opinion is you can over-criteria yourself to death. I think the fewer, more succinct criteria you have, the better chance that you have a success. And there are going to be potentially some parcels in the interior of neighborhoods that may be identified that will have a difficult time falling under any of these specific criteria. So I personally view the criteria as being a broad framework for decision-making, but if you get too detailed on it, it's going to be stifling. And plus, it'll take you hours to make any decisions. So,
Only hours?
So could I respond to that then?
Sure.
So it doesn't say that the answers to these questions have to be a particular thing, only they should think about them. And I don't see, maybe I'm just come at this differently, I don't see a lot of these requiring that complicated thinking. Some are going to require some expertise, but not most of them, anyway.
okay. The motion is to task the task force to bring back an evaluation criteria to the council for approval, using as a starting point the 9 criteria listed in the communication and adding commercial viability. Council ready to vote on that?
The vote is 6 in favor with Councilwoman Cole voting no. The motion's approved.
Okay.
I'll move that we have somebody from Arapahoe County, and I'll leave them up to whether it's going to be somebody on staff or whether it's going to be an open space.
Just a
on
point of
task
procedure,
force.
Council, I guess I'd anticipated that you would, maybe through your presiding officer, through the mayor, that you would contact each one of these that you wanted to serve and ask that governing board to either select somebody or appoint somebody to serve. So I didn't know whether council wanted to use a different process or not, but just to throw that out for your discussion.
Yeah, I think Jim is just trying to clarify which entities and then who on the entity.
Okay, no, and I just wanted to add that little procedural
Yeah.
piece because I didn't happen to address it in your draft.
Yeah, and you know, my take on it is that we would contact the entity and let them decide. The council,
Fine.
you may have somebody on the council that wants specifically an elected person or a staff person for Arapahoe County and South Suburban, but.
I'll let them decide, that's fine.
Okay, but why don't you go ahead and establish that as part of the membership, and then we'll have that done with.
Well, that was, the motion I made was that we have somebody from Arapahoe County on the task force.
Just them?
Say what?
They're on
Why don't you
there.
make the list?
Why don't you make a list?
Okay, so Arapahoe County, South Suburban Park and Recreation District, the Trust for Public Land, and Littleton City staff.
Second.
We already did South Metro Land.
Okay, Arapahoe County,
already
South
done
Suburban Park and Recreation, Trust for Public Land, and
Littleton City staff.
Littleton City staff.
Those are listed. Talk about that separately.
Well, that'll be a separate one. Okay, is there a second on that? Phil,
I already did.
thank you.
Okay, now read it again. There's a lot of talking.
The motion is to appoint somebody from Arapahoe County, South Suburban Park and Rec, Trust for Public Land, and Littleton City staff.
Okay, so somebody means one person,
Yes.
and two from city council still stays?
No, the city council hasn't been decided yet,
Okay,
quantity
So-
or who.
okay, so one from each of those
One
groups?
from each.
Okay.
Further discussion. Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor, the motion's approved.
Okay. Wow. Who on council do we want, and how many?
My preference, obviously, is going to be that nobody on city council ought to be on this committee.
Okay, let's have somebody else make the motion, and then you can vote against it. It'll be easier procedurally. At this point in time, I think it'd be appropriate to put Deb and Phil on the group. If there's any other council people that want to be on it, then perhaps we should increase the council membership from 2. But that's my leanings right now.
Fine with me.
Is that okay with you? All right, someone want to make a motion?
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved to appoint Deb and Phil.
Second.
Council members, discussion? Ready to vote?
The vote is 6 in favor with Councilman Taylor voting no. The motion's approved.
Okay. And I'm going to add one last thing, and that is that the second charge we give to the task force is that they come back with a list of properties. They return with a list of properties that are potential acquisitions.
I'll second.
And the reason I want to define that is as we look at this, there's some confusion to my mind on whether the task force then would be an implementing task force or whether they're simply identifying the properties. And I'm okay with either one if the task force comes back and decides that they want to recommend that they continue involvement. But I think what we're ultimately looking for is a list of properties from the task force that they are recommending to us based on the criteria that they've brought to us and we've approved. Bruce?
The introductory page here talks about strategically acquiring property and making other improvements that support and advance broader goals of the city, such as buffering, enhancing fish habitat or recreational opportunities along South Platte Park River, or South Platte River. I certainly think a list of properties is appropriate, but I wonder if it wouldn't also be appropriate to have them consider the viability of other potential investments, for example, spending money on Hudson Gardens, which is something we talked about with South Suburban at that breakfast we had, hypothetically.
I see the potential for a number of different things that the task force could do, including that.
Okay.
But
I just don't want to limit.
where I'm at is we have some potential acquisitions that are basically going to wait for a a product from the task force. And the more that we ladle on to the task force table, the longer it's going to take for them to come up with a product. So my reasoning for putting this here is the first thing that I'm expecting out of them is a list of properties. If they come back and tell us, we see a role for us in other areas, or we decide that they have an appropriate role in other areas, we could add that onto them. But I would see that as happening after they come up with a list of properties.
And I'm okay with that. I probably would like them to consider that, but I'm certainly okay with them considering it after they deal with the property issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How soon are we hoping we might get these?
What's today, Tuesday?
By Friday, huh? Okay.
Thursday.
In my wildest dreams, this would happen in 90 days to 6 months.
I'm trying to see if Charlie just fell out of his seat. Charlie, do you have an idea how long it might take a task force to do this?
City manager's leaving in 6 months? I think 90 days is very optimistic.
Well, give us a realistic, not pessimistic, but
Oh,
Well,
realistic.
what's our soundbite? What have you
depends.
learned from me over?
It all depends.
Yeah, and it really does depend. It depends upon the level of complexity. It depends upon this layer of criteria that you come back. You know, you could set a target date. I would say 90 to 120 days for maybe a status report. Might be something for them to shoot at.
Well, and honestly, if they start working on this stuff and they start spinning wheels, I think we'd prefer to hear that sooner than later so we
Yeah.
can refine what we're doing and not just leave them out there hanging.
Well, the first thing that they're going to come back to us with is the list of criteria. And they have to come up
Yeah.
with that first
Which is
before
good
they can do
framing.
anything else.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, if you want that back to council within 30, 60
So
days.
what we
and
might
and
do
how
is-
soon that comes back and how complex that
Right.
is will give us an idea how long it will take.
What we might do is ask them to set out a calendar with some target dates. A calendar, a target date to get criteria back to you, and then so that it's more iterative. That might make more sense.
well, of course, Charlie's here to help translate what we're saying, but we have this document that is a public document that says that we expect them to complete their work within 18 to 24 months. I'm wanting myself to have something completed, hopefully within a year, maybe less than that. And so I have a companion question. What if we see a property that we think we might like to put our money into while this task force is working, are we still able to do that?
Sure. Well, the 18 to 24 months was suggested in your study session last
Well, I
week.
think Charlie suggested it. Somebody suggested it, not us.
What I'm going to say is that if a property becomes available or you're strongly interested, you could refer it back to the task force for a recommendation, then come back to the city council. It just depends on how often the committee meets. It depends on how much homework they give me to do.
And just to reiterate it depends, I think some of it depends on the criteria. And for example, Mr. Cernanek, who's going to be on the task force now, said one of the things that he was very interested in was more of a strategic framework. So I think to the degree that the task force comes up with a strategic framework that says, these are why we are trying to accomplish these. And here's why, let's say it came on the market, let's just say that something comes up in the first 30 days. I mean, part of what the task force is going to have to decide, and with Mr. Cernanek sitting there, is does this have some sort of strategic structure to it that we know how this fits in, what we're trying to accomplish. So part of that is going to be the criteria, the additional criteria. If it comes back and they say, this is really pretty and we have a willing seller, is that going to meet all of your criteria to have a strategic framework? So some of that, I think, is going to be the dialogue I mean, like I said, you might suggest some target dates for the task force to ask them to work out a calendar for some target dates. But, you know, part of that's going to be the level of complexity and how broad those goals are, because what I heard council saying is, gosh, we're kind of hearing, you know, we kind of get this kind of off the cuff suggestions from people, and we really don't have a comprehensive framework to decide why we want to go after one piece of property or the other. So part of it's up to you.
Right.
You know, what kind of criteria you want to use.
And I might be wrong, but my recollection, at least with the South Platte Working Group, was there was a criteria framing aspect and a calendaring that occurred early on. And then there was actually a larger group, which in this case would be more like the council that adopted or accepted the criteria and an overall calendar that folks operated within. And I would see something like that. But I think it's inappropriate until you have the actual task force members possibly in a room together to impose it, other than thinking, we have some sort of general time frame. This is not something that is going to be a standing committee. You know, we have a task to bring something back, and putting a reasonable time frame and having a quick report after the task force has their first meeting is going to be you know, a reasonable thing to kind of give you an idea as to, you know, here's, you know, we understand, we've taken a look at the calendar, and you know, I've said it's probably going to be somewhere around 10 meetings or so to get through some of the criteria.
Well, there's not necessarily any reason why the list can't be released until it's completely full. There's no reason why the task force can't designate properties as they go along. It doesn't have to be we have to wait until we get every property that we think we're going to come up with and then release a report.
Well, I'm asking some of my questions in part because who volunteers or who is appointed to serve from these different groups may depend on how much work is expected to be accomplished in a certain amount of time. And so with Charlie and Phil both helping communicate this, but I'm just hoping that we'll get some key pieces to this sooner rather than later. That's my feeling.
Okay, and I think we have one last issue that I can think of.
You got to vote on this one.
Pardon? Oh, we haven't voted on this one. Ready to vote? The motion is that the task force come back with a list of properties that are potential acquisition. Phil? Up is what you want.
Vote is 7 in favor. The motion's approved.
Thought I was already there.
All right.
Then I have another question, I'm sorry. So when we, in documents related to various commissions and boards and task forces and so forth, it spells out the purpose, the composition, the whole thing. Are we going to have then a document somewhat similar, well, at least to parts of this, that will be called Open Space Task Force and have the related?
I think they'll have to bring that back to us as part of the criteria. A document that describes what it is that the criteria is.
Well, I mean, we just had several motions that are going to be part of that. That's what I'm saying. The criteria then would be another part when we approve those.
So you're asking for a summary document to define the...
Yeah,
That's fine.
Thank you.
I would be happy to write one up.
Thank you.
But not before Friday, because I have to do the workshop report by Friday. Jim?
Well, I was just going to make the comment that the South Platte Working Group had a consultant that helped them put together their criteria and timelines and things like that, which I served on that group for the first year, and I think that it took us several months to get to that point. If you don't have somebody who's in charge of leading that that charge.
If they need one, then I think they could come back and ask for one, but I'm hoping that this group will go a little faster than some of those other groups. Now, the one last issue that I can think of is one that Phil brought up, and that is we've been referring to this as the Open Space Task Force, but I think what we mean is the Park and Open Space Task Force, that this isn't exclusively for passive properties. So, Phil, you want to make that motion, to title it the Park and Open Space?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved to title the group the Park and Open Space Task Force. Discussion? Ready to vote?
Vote of 7 in favor, the motion's approved.
Okay. Do we need to do
And
anything else
don't
with
worry,
this?
Charlie, trails are just linear parks.
All right, that brings us to 9B, which is the draft of the RFP to solicit services for an executive search firm.
Eric Von Savage, our HR director's here, and he drafted this for you and is ready to respond to your comments and help you put together a process for yourself.
Any questions for Eric? Deb?
And I don't know if this is just kind of assumed within the working with, what are we going to call them?
Search firms, executive search firms.
Say it?
Executive search firms.
Executives. I'm assuming that we're probably going to have some from out of state too, or are you going to just locally? Okay. So what are the considerations then when they're out of state? Are there any special considerations?
As far as the firms themselves being out of state?
Yeah.
They generally all compete in the same format. So if what you're looking for is your scope of services, and each of those firms, regardless of whether they're in-state or out-of-state, are going to address those concerns and how they would address them. Probably the main concern that you would have for an out-of-state firm would be any of the travel expenses that would be associated with that. And they're going to vary.
Okay.
Jim?
I'm assuming that it's going to be the HR department who's going to be leading all the contacts with the potential contractor?
Yeah, we have that listed in that. Currently, how we have it listed is that they would submit all of their RFPs electronically to us, and then we would coordinate that with council.
Okay.
Just a clarification, Eric. In the Phase 3 that's identified in the scope of services, I just want to make sure that the pre-established criteria is not something that's sitting in someone's back pocket right now, but that's the criteria that's actually developed in Phase 1. And one of the things that I think would be good material, and of course any respondent would say, how do they actually go about establishing that criteria? Because it's a very important stage, and that would be something that they should certainly include in their proposal.
We can definitely do that, and it's usually not, they may have recommendations, but they're going to solicit feedback from council and in order to build the criteria.
That's expected, but it's also one of those things that they, if they're smart, they'll hit on.
Well, and we will approve the criteria, the desired characteristics before it goes out for solicitation of candidates.
Right. I'm presuming that's what happens in Phase 1. At each one of these phases, there's some check back or exposure that comes in.
They may actually bring more than one phase back to you at a time, so you may see not just one coming each time you have a council meeting, but it would be grouped.
At least the ones that build on each other.
Yes.
All right, any other questions about this? The draft proposal for the request for proposals. Shall we get a motion to approve this so we can go forward?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved to approve the draft process for the request for proposals and move forward.
I do have a question about Exhibit A, Eric. On the back side under compensation, I'm assuming that the contractor would determine which one of those that they would choose to employ, whether it's a lump sum, whether it's time and material, whether it's annual fee. Is that correct?
There can be some negotiating with that when they send their RFP in. They will probably present it to you in the format that they are most comfortable with, and then you can kind of select and customize that and negotiate that before you settle on a final agreement.
In that Exhibit A, I'm presuming we're going to expect some level of professional liability insurance.
That's actually in the contract itself.
Yeah.
You're asking for a warranty, is that what I'm hearing?
Actually, we got one last time.
It's number 6 in the contract.
Yeah.
Got it, okay.
Any other discussion? The motion is to approve the draft process of the RFP and move forward. Does that provide you enough direction? Okay. Council ready to vote?
Vote is 7 in favor, the motion's approved.
All right.
And I did talk with Eric on the phone yesterday, little edity things that I know you guys hate, but is it okay if I, as Eric requested, just give him my little edits that do not at all change substance? He can do with them what he wants.
Okay.
Yeah, these are, I mean, he's asked when I give those to him, so.
All righty.
Is it, but you guys are using a standard city contract form, right? So you're.
There's nothing in that. There was nothing in
Oh.
the contract part of it.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
Some of it was just consistency with capitalization in the other document,
okay.
that kind of thing.
Okay. Reports. Mr. City Manager.
Council, just 2 quick things to remind you that you do have breakfast scheduled this Thursday with the Planning Commission. And if you recall, when you changed your meeting with the Housing Authority, you had asked whether we could have some items ready to come to you next week on the 22nd. And we will be prepared to bring a review of the PDO ordinance to you and review of the community development process flow charts. So you will have a study session next week on the 22nd, and we will have those 2 items prepared to use that time slot. And that's all I have.
Thank you to Jan.
I just wanted to mention that we do have a training set up for the new board and commission members the last Tuesday in whatever month we're in, March. It's the 29th, and it's at 5:30. It won't be a large training. We actually just sent out invitations to those who were newly appointed, not the reappointments.
All righty. Jose?
Question
I'm
for the
sorry.
city attorney. There were some comments that were made after the licensing authority meeting last week where there was a bit of surprise in the process that was a change. And I don't know if I didn't give you a heads up, and my apologies, Suzanne. Maybe you could outline a little bit of what's going on there?
Well, there's actually been no policy change. I think that there was some miscommunication about what had been going on prior to this particular hearing. The licensing authority hasn't met for a few months, and what happened was they were brought a number of show cause citations that were stipulated. And in the past, the city attorney's office has gotten those stipulations to the facts and then made their recommendations the night of the hearing. In this case, the stipulations and the recommendations were all done in advance and presented to the authority, and they had some questions about that, and ultimately decided that they didn't want stipulations as to the sentences, they just wanted stipulations as to the facts. I think procedurally, that's probably not going to happen for a number of reasons. I don't think that generally a licensee is going to want to stipulate to the facts of an allegation without having any idea what the penalty will be. But that's what the authority wanted, so that's what they'll be brought interim unless we run into problems with that.
Okay, is there an opportunity to discuss that with the authority and kind of get them to understand a little bit of, how they're, unlike some of our other boards and commissions, they are in actual judicial position, and so understanding how sometimes those negotiations happen not in front of the commission.
Right, well, there was a long discussion. I don't know if you were present or you watched it, I went back and watched it. There was a long discussion about that, and there are a number of factors that we consider in bringing that kind of stipulation. One has to do with police officer overtime. We don't wish to bring police officers in to sit at licensing hearings. Another one has to do with the witnesses. In this case, it was a sting, and these were college kids who had went in to buy liquor underage, and were now back up at CSU. And so to not have stipulations would have meant asking those kids to come back down to testify. So that was another factor that led us to enter into these stipulations. If you watched it, interestingly enough, none of the issue didn't seem to be that they had a problem with the content of the stipulation. All the stipulations were approved. The issue seemed to be that they wanted full authority and felt that it was being taken from them. And I guess we could have a study session with them to talk about that a little bit further. My understanding was at the end of it, the city attorney, who's actually our city prosecutor, said, well, if you just want me to try to get stipulated facts, I can do that. She explained, I don't know that that's realistic, that somebody's going to just come in and plead guilty and not know what the parameters are going to be. But she told the authority that if that's what they desired, that she would do that, and they indicated that it was. Now, what that means is that we will then have to bring in those officers and those witnesses on those types of cases. So if that becomes a problem, it may be something that we have to bring back to council as a policy issue. There are some other policy issues that I think Wendy and I just talked about last week about fines in lieu in the state. In lieu of suspension, you can pay a fine. That was visited with council maybe many years ago when the statute was first put into place, maybe 10 years ago. Yeah, maybe closer to 20, and the council decided they didn't want to do a fine in lieu. Well, that has become general practice across the state, that if you receive a suspension, you can pay a fine. So we thought about maybe bringing that back to visit with the liquor authority and then the council. So it may be that we have a study session with them at some point in the future to discuss trends. But I don't believe it was a change in policy. I think what happened was it was just a little more organized. And they, the fact that the stipulation was written on the form instead of the city attorney standing up and making the recommendation made them think that it was different. But as a legal matter, it wasn't different. It was just all on one document.
Just some of the feedback, I think there might still be some confusion, but it might be worth some time just to have a quick discussion with the authority.
We can do that. We can set a study session with them and discuss this, and then discuss maybe the fine issue. I don't have anything else.
Jose?
Yes, I would like to just speak about the youth initiative, Greater Littleton Youth Initiative. The meeting was last Friday, and we had a group in there that was speaking about bullying in the schools and how they are working to prevent this from the start of kids in the kindergarten up through the 5th grade, I think it is, and it was quite an exciting talk that they gave up there as to how they take this all the way through from not just the children, but they also take it to the parents, because sometimes they have to figure out where all of this started. And a lot of it is their environmental, family, the way that they're treated at home, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a very nice program that is working with this, and they're in most of the schools around here now. And the other thing I talked about was the fact that I was listening to a program, actually it was news, I think, and the sheriff from Eagle County was speaking about the incidence of suicides in that county. It's the greatest amount of suicides for a county in Colorado. And so what they attribute a lot of this to up in the mountainous area is to the altitude. I don't know how they come about that, but they've got it, I guess, if they got less oxygen in their brain, etc. But I told Kay, who is the charge of this, that it might be nice that they do have a program going up there. It was similar to the Greater Littleton Youth Initiative, it sounds like to me, and I told her that it might be a good idea if we send them up some email and some of our information that we use here in Littleton schools, and might give them a little hand up there. Seem to have it going pretty good, but the yellow ribbon is probably one of the greatest things I think that kids can have. And that's the card where if you're getting yourself in trouble with suicide or something, suicide thoughts, you just hand this card to a counselor or a teacher. There's nothing spoke between you. You're taken to the right person, might be even to Littleton Hospital, which handles a lot of them. And they're dealt with there and taken care of. And this has helped a lot of kids because you don't have to explain a thing. You just go right to they'll take you right to straight to the person, counselor that you probably work with, and they'll get you some treatment of some sort. So I think that's a great thing. Be nice if everybody had one of those things. Even adults, once in a while, you feel like
Well, you remember, Jose,
forget it. What's that?
Last fall or summer, early last fall maybe, we had the report at GLYI about an adult who found the yellow ribbon card in the child's clothes when they were going to put them in the wash, and the person was feeling suicidal, and it got the person to the right people just because that adult, the parent, found the child's yellow ribbon card.
Yeah.
So
Most generally, they won't tell any of their parents about this. The parents will be the last ones to know it. And the other kids that are within their group might know it, and they have a right to make mention of it, but most generally it's up to the individual to hand this card to somebody, and they'll be taken care of right away.
Joe, you mentioning bullying in schools. Channel 7 right now is running a program at their 10 o'clock news about bullying in schools. It's a fairly lengthy segment every night, and it's all going on all this week.
Yeah. It's a big problem with some people, and if you can get them early enough, and, you get a kid aside that's kind of weak in areas, and you just tell them, hey, you did a great job on this particular project, or you did a good job on this test, and you keep thanking them and telling them and building them up to the point where they start feeling good about themselves, and I think that's basically what it's all about.
Jose, you were telling me one time how many of your staff members have committed suicide over the years?
Well, when I first opened up in the family bar, I was there 10 years, and we lost 5 kids to suicide that were working for me. And that was in an era of the 60s and 70s when you...
This didn't happen.
Yeah. So, yeah, just... And a lot of them told me they were going to do it. I mean, a few of them told me that they were going to kill themselves, and you take them aside and sit them down, talk them, oh, well, I won't do it tonight. Actually, that's the way they talk. But you know that for them to even say something of that nature, it's on their mind. So it's I think in restaurant business, we're probably the first line of people that ever see that because of the fact that we have so many youngsters work for us. And a lot of them are depressed, and a lot of them just don't care. And I think that the first jobs that they have can either make them or break them, depending on how you treat those kids. So I'm glad that GLYI came along, because it does it does a real good job for the kids in the schools, and it's all over. So I think it's something we have to be aware of all the time. So.
Bruce?
It's a terrific program, no question about it. Wanted to, of course, take an opportunity to wish everyone happy St. Patrick's Day, and I'm compelled to point out that years ago, our family, of course, shortened the name from O. Stallman to Stallman, so, and I'm sure your family did too, Phil. No, but, you know, Shore and Bagora. Miss Kelly had asked that we sort of take a show of hands here in terms of the Littleton Public School Foundation Dinner on 16 April for head count purposes. So is that what we were looking for here? Just wanted to see how many people might be going for purposes
And
of...
staff?
Yeah, I got 2.
I've already RSVP'd for 2.
So, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I think my wife gets better over here.
Okay, okay. Does that help?
Peggy, Phil, Jim,
Doug, me, and you were maybe.
Maybe.
and a spouse or...
Yeah. Or maybe both. Okay, excellent. And the traditional Irish, often imitated, never duplicated merchant plug of the week. Actually, in retrospect, I probably should have done someone who serves up Irish coffee, but instead, we're going to go with the weather dictating that now that people will be getting out and utilizing the substantial quantity of open space the city has graciously provided with taxpayer assistance, that it is absolutely appropriate to take a swing over to Littleton Cyclery, one of a District 1 business this week. And Littleton Cyclery is more than just a corner bike shop. It is, in fact, a lifestyle, and probably a life cycle. Whether you're preparing for your next race or rediscovering the city on 2 wheels, our expert staff will ensure professional cycling experience with room to grow. Awards and accolades are never the goal, but distinctive products and services will always be noticed, and we're proud to have been featured in many prominent cycling magazines and publications. I think this pretty much captures the essence of the business. Although Littleton Cyclery has seen 7 ownerships, 4 names, and 65 years in business, one thing has remained the same: the telephone number, which is in fact 303-798-5033, and you can find them at 2640 West Bellevue Avenue, and that's actually fairly close to Prince Street over there in River Point. River Point Downs, I guess, is the technical name. So there you have it, the merchant plug of the week as you get out there and get your cycling equipment tuned up for the season. Deb?
The Pre-sale continues. There's about 80 trees left, and the deadline is when the last tree is gone. So if you haven't gotten your trees yet, go onto the website, littletongov.org, and you'll see what trees are still available.
Jim?
Yes, the C-470 Corridor Coalition Policy Meeting was held on March the 3rd in Inverness. Larry Warner, who is with Parsons Brinkerhoff, was a facilitator. Charlie Bloston's on the technical working group. We adopted a mission statement, established some goals and objectives, reviewed the schedule for the next 2 years. Future projections show a huge influx of automobiles on C-470 in the not too distant future. Attended a workshop on expanding transportation connectivity in the Denver region, was sponsored by Transportation Solutions. The main speaker was Philip Washington, who's the general manager of RTD. There were others who also spoke briefly about transportation and how to potentially solve it. I had a short Littleton Housing Authority meeting, talked about utility allowances, closing accounts on the auditor's recommendation. The house that was headed for foreclosure was refinanced, and so we're not going to take possession back of that again. Bringing IT services in-house and possible changes to a computer program. Our computer program is about 12 years old. I also attended a Dr. Cog Metro Vision short course. The group used the clickers to chart desired course for the region, just as it was used in my Citizen One forum here last September. And the results were strikingly similar between a group of planners and a group of citizens that were out of my district. So the same majorities occurred in both spots for all of the criteria they were going through. So very interesting.
Phil? Yes, for those of you that are interested in scavenger hunts, there is a time frame on this one with entrances to be provided by October 1st. For those of you that aren't aware, this is the 150th anniversary of Arapahoe County. And items number 9 and number 15, we have a leg up. They feature the Littleton Museum as well as downtown Littleton. So go out and have some fun. Get in the drawing. I believe it's for a $150 Visa card. So get your right answers together. Charlie, I have a question for you later, so not now. With regard, the Historic Preservation Board meeting is next Monday this month, so we're kind of a little off sequence. The South Metro Denver Chamber of Commerce, the Legislative Action Committee, received a policy position statement that has been developed around economic development initiatives, and really what is primary in it is to grow primary jobs in this. And so it's a very interesting position paper for some guidance within the chamber. This Thursday, which also happens to be St. Patrick's Day, and Erin go Bra for the Irish on Friday, when they have a chance to go up in Chicago. That'll be a place where I'll be paying some attention. But this Thursday, there's an empowerment series on Bucks for Business. And the Legislative Action Committee was discussing 2 pieces of legislation that one is in the House and one is in the Senate, currently in the state of Colorado, regarding seed money for the smallest of businesses. Bankers have kind of readily said they've loosened things up, but it's for what they call small businesses, which we would consider more than medium size by our standards. And this is how do you find ways to get a small amount of money? So it actually works in concert with a lot of our economic gardening. That's there. Last Wednesday, the business leaders had an opportunity to hear from Henry Sobenet, who's the Executive Director of Planning and Budget at the state level. And for all of those folks that are interested in some other fun, go out and see backseatbudgeter.com, I believe is where it is. And you have an opportunity to try and balance the state budget on your own. So have some fun at it. I know that Bruce has all the answers, and so he's gone through the technical analysis on that side.
I'm not sharing, though.
With anyone. Last Wednesday at the South Suburban Park and Rec District meeting, this is going to be a scoop for you folks because it's not going to hit the public press until March 21st, which is next Monday. But the Hudson Gardens concert lineup for this summer has some very interesting dates. And I think I gave you the wrong date, Kelly. It's actually August 21st. For the Frampton Comes Alive 35th Anniversary Tour. It's going to be a 3-hour concert, so take note, Heather, on that evening. Other performers or talent that's of note is the prior Sunday on August 14th. That's why I ended up being a little confused. Richard Marks, who is a song writer, is a solo performer, but at least the current plan is that he's going to be performing with the Littleton Symphony, 20 items of string that is going to be out there, and so those are certainly some items. And then, of course, with their fireworks show, they're going to have the Guess Who on Sundays of July 3rd, and then POCO is going to be here on July 4th, so pay some attention. You'll notice as it goes through their radio sponsor this year is Mix 100, and so that's where I think the news is going to be broken. And so Jennifer and Paul, if you want to see the list and get the rest of the performers this summer, but it's really looks to be a very good item. They've swung a little bit away from the 60s and more towards the 70s, 80s, and 90s and what they've done. Hudson Gardens provided a report. The important item is they definitely are looking forward to the outreach breakfast where we'll have with them on May 19th. It's certainly on their calendar, and they're interested in certainly continuing to work with the city. Also at the board meeting, they did pass the resolution supporting the Highline study group. That Highline Canal that's going through. It was also mentioned that Ray Prince, who was a former executive director of the South Suburban Park and Rec District, was the one who originally approached Denver Water to change over the service roads that were along the canal into our currently now neighborhood trails. And so that's very nice. And we hope to have Scott Ladona. Kelly, did you make contact with Scott yet on the Environmental Education Award?
Yes,
And he's coming?
yes.
Good, okay. I'll leave that. And so stay tuned for things to go. And so.
Peggy.
Well, I have nothing of such cheer, and Bruce already preempted St. Patty's Day. But I do hope, if anybody's listening, watching, that anyone who hasn't already contributed something to help with the disaster in Japan would consider doing so. We are so fortunate here, and it's just incredible, I'm sure, for all of us to imagine what they're dealing with there. So, sorry to end on a little sad note.
Bruce?
I neglected to mention, and I was just informed that Jose's Shamrock Restaurant will be serving massive amounts of corned beef and cabbage on St. Patrick's Day as well. So.
Green tacos.
Ooh, that's it. There you go. Real green.
Wendy just reminded me, Council, one procedural item. When you set your study session agenda for April 12th, we are going to discuss the lighting ordinance.
Right.
And Council had specifically requested that the car dealers be invited. And Wendy's had an inquiry as to whether the car dealers will be permitted to speak. Now, that's always been a council discretion, but I guess we've had an inquiry, so we wanted to ask you if you wanted to make any kind of decision on that tonight.
Council, what's your druthers?
I'll just soon they come.
Mind if they speak?
My guess is we'll be asking them questions anyway, so.
If they come prepared, it might take a shorter amount of time.
Do you want me to send a reminder letter out to them?
Yes, please.
Oh, and I have a question.
With the draft lighting ordinance, why don't you include that with the letter, please?
Okay.
I have a question about another council breakfast.
I was going to ask one on follow-up. Do we want to give them some guidance on public comment in time limits, or?
Short and sweet?
I will put that in some magic
Okay,
sentence.
thank you.
When we have the breakfast with the planning commission, I think that's on our agenda, right?
Yeah, that's this Thursday, yes, ma'am.
So have we invited the newly appointed people?
I'm assuming that we have. I know the appointees were there last night, and so does anybody know? Oh, Dennis is here. I'm sorry, I didn't see him.
We have, I think, I'm not sure any of them are going to be able to make it. They have been invited, so.
Dennis Swain, Acting Community Development Director, is answering that they have been invited. He's not sure at this point how many of the new appointees can attend, but they have been invited.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought of it about 10 days ago, and I should have immediately alerted so they'd have more time to have worked it in their schedule.
Okay, Jim, Dr. Cogger report.
Yes, the February Board of Directors meeting occurred after our February meeting, but the Rocky Mountain Region HUD Director, who's Rick Garcia, talked of sustainable planning grants and sustainability goals. Dr. Cog is on a priority list for the next round of funding if Congress approves the next round of funding. We held a public hearing on the 2012-2017 Transportation Improvement Program and conformity plans. We adopted the MetroVision 2035 MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan and conformity documents. We had a presentation made on the upcoming Board of Directors workshop, which occurred the end of the month. Elected officers adopted policy statement for federal legislative issues and discussed state legislative bills and heard various reports. The Area Agency on Aging meeting was a lot about being very concerned about cuts to senior services, primarily dealing with transportation, Meals on Wheels, that type of thing. The Administrative Committee approved several contracts and discussed security of not only the building but of our meetings. Regional Transportation Committee met this morning and had a very lengthy discussion on the changes being made to the 2012-2017 Transportation Improvement Program, especially the Regional Air Quality Commission funding that was removed out of the TIP. And it generated a lot of discussion. I expect even tomorrow night to have more when all members of the Board of Directors will be taking up the topic. We certified this morning the Metro Transportation Planning process for the Denver region. So that's Dr. Cog.
If there's no other business, then